Did you hear that?
What was that? It's coming from over there.
I think I saw something moving.
There are families in this country who are so powerful, so deeply woven into the institutions of the communities they inhabit, that the rules everyone else lives by simply do not apply to them. Not because they are above the law, but because they helped write it. Because their grandfather was the prosecutor. Because their father was the partner. Because their name is on the courthouse. Because when you have operated at the center of a community's legal and social life for 3 generations, you stop being a person subject to consequences and start being something closer to a force of nature, something that bends the world around it rather than being bent by it. And the people around you start to behave accordingly. They look away when they should look closer. They accept explanations that do not quite add up. They give you the benefit of a doubt that they would never extend to anyone else. Because you are the Calloway family. And in Beaufort County, South Carolina, the Calloway family has always been the law. On the evening of June 7th, 2021, a man named Alexander Calloway called 911 from the grounds of his family's sprawling 1,200-acre estate outside the town of Hampton, South Carolina. His voice on that call was shaking. He told the dispatcher that he had just come home from visiting his elderly mother and had found his wife and his youngest son shot dead near the dog kennels at the back of the property. His wife, Carol, 52 years old. His son, Tyler, 22. Both of them gone. The call went out. Deputies arrived. The estate filled with law enforcement. And Alexander Calloway, 3rd-generation attorney, partner at his family's law firm, pillar of the Beaufort County legal community, a man who knew every judge and every prosecutor and every sheriff's deputy in a 5-county region, stood in the lights of the patrol vehicles and wept. What followed from that night was one of the most extraordinary criminal cases in the history of South Carolina. A story so layered with deception and financial crime and family tragedy and institutional failure that it took the better part of 4 years to fully understand the shape of it. And just when the country thought the shape had been determined, just when 2 life sentences had been handed down and the verdicts had been delivered, the South Carolina Supreme Court stepped in and overturned everything. In May of 2026, Alexander Calloway was granted a new murder trial. The man who wept on the grounds of his estate on the night his wife and son were found shot dead was going to get another chance to convince a jury that he did not do it. This is his story. This is their story. And this is the story of a county, a community, and a system that protected one man for so long that by the time the full picture finally emerged, the damage it had done was almost impossible to calculate. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what you are about to hear will stay with you for a very long time. Before we go back to that June night on the Calloway estate, I need you to hold several questions in your mind as we work through this story together. Not the questions the prosecution asked in the courtroom. Not the questions the defense raised on appeal. The deeper questions. The ones that exist underneath this entire case, like a fault line running through rock. The first question is this. How does a man steal money from his own clients? From vulnerable people who trusted him with their most painful moments, their injury settlements, their wrongful death claims, for more than 20 years, to the tune of nearly $12 million. Without the institution, he works for catching on until it is almost too late. The second question, how does a community so thoroughly organized around a single family's power and reputation allow that power and that reputation to function as a shield for so long that by the time anyone finally looked clearly at what was behind the shield, there were multiple unexplained deaths, a faked suicide attempt, a drug addiction spanning 2 decades, and a double murder waiting to be reckoned with? The third question, what does it mean for the concept of justice when a man is convicted of murdering his wife and his son, sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, and then has those convictions overturned? Not because new evidence emerged proving his innocence, but because a court clerk wanted to write a book about the trial and her influence on the jury was deemed to have compromised the process? And the fourth question, which is perhaps the most uncomfortable of all, if Alexander Calloway did kill Carol and Tyler, if the prosecution's theory is correct that he murdered the 2 people closest to him in the world to buy himself time and sympathy as his financial crimes were closing in, what does that tell us about the specific madness of a man who has lived his entire life convinced that his name and his position can solve any problem? That wealth and status and the right connections can make anything disappear? And who, when the walls finally closed in, apparently concluded that even this, could be managed? We are going to work through all of it. But first you need to understand where the Calloway family came from. Because nothing about this story makes sense unless you understand what they were before the night of June 7th, 2021. The Calloway family had been the dominant legal force in Hampton County, South Carolina, and the surrounding Lowcountry region for 3 consecutive generations. Alexander Calloway's grandfather, Robert Earl Calloway, had served as the county solicitor, the chief local prosecutor, beginning in the 1920s. When Robert Earl retired, his son James took over the role. And when James retired, the family moved from the public sector into private practice, founding the law firm that would bear their name and would become one of the most successful personal injury practices in the state. For roughly 100 years, the Calloway name had been synonymous with legal power in that corner of South Carolina. Local people called the region Calloway Country, not as a criticism, as a fact. Alexander Calloway, known to everyone who knew him as Alex, was born into this legacy in 1968. He grew up understanding that he was not just a person, but a representative of something larger than himself. A family institution, a lineage of civic authority, a tradition that carried both privilege and expectation in equal measure. He attended the University of South Carolina for both undergraduate and law school. He was personable, charming, immediately likable. He had the specific social fluency of a man raised in a culture that placed enormous value on relationships and on the performance of warmth and trustworthiness. He joined the family firm. He married a woman named Carol Kennedy, who was warm and social and deeply embedded in the charitable and civic life of the county. They had 2 sons, Richard, who everyone called Buster, and Tyler, and they built a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like the life that a Calloway of Beaufort County was supposed to build. Beautiful home, social prominence, deep community ties, the kind of family that gets photographed at charity fundraisers and whose Christmas card you keep on your mantelpiece. What was happening inside that life was a different story entirely. In the early 2000s, Alex Calloway underwent knee surgery. During his recovery, he was prescribed oxycodone. And at some point in that recovery, at some point in the quiet of a man healing from a physical injury in a house full of comfort and privilege, something happened that would define the next 20 years of his life and ultimately consume everything he had built. He became addicted, not mildly dependent, profoundly, devastatingly addicted. At the height of his addiction, by his own later admission, Alex Calloway was consuming up to 60 oxycodone pills per day. 60. The kind of quantity that requires an enormous amount of money to sustain and an enormous amount of concealment to hide from everyone around you. He chose concealment over getting help. And he chose a particular method of funding his addiction that put him at the center of one of the largest financial fraud cases in South Carolina's legal history. He began stealing from his clients, not in a single impulsive moment, not in a desperate act of need, systematically, methodically. Over years, and then over decades, Alexander Calloway intercepted settlement checks, fabricated attorneys' fees, diverted insurance payments, and routed money that belonged to the people who had hired him. Often people at the lowest and most vulnerable points of their lives, accident victims, grieving families, people who had suffered genuine losses and had come to the Calloway firm because the Calloway name meant trust, directly into accounts he controlled. By the time investigators fully tallied the extent of the fraud, the total stolen from clients and from the firm itself was somewhere in the region of $12 million. $12 million. Taken over 20 years. From people who trusted him. From people who did not know that the man sitting across the desk from them with his warm smile and his family name and his reputation built over 3 generations was stealing from them while they grieved. Now I need to tell you about Gloria Freeman, because Gloria Freeman is one of the most important people in this entire story, and she is also someone who did not receive nearly the attention she deserved in the years when this case first became public. Gloria Freeman was the Calloway family's housekeeper. She had worked for them for more than 20 years. She was not just an employee in the formal sense of that word. She had helped raise Tyler and Buster. She had been present in that house for the ordinary and the extraordinary moments of family life across 2 decades. She was, by the accounts of everyone who knew the situation, someone the boys genuinely loved. She was 57 years old. And in February of 2018, Gloria Freeman died at the Calloway estate after what was described as a trip and fall accident on the stairs. She was taken to the hospital. She died 10 days later. Her death was not reported to the coroner. No autopsy was performed. The official conclusion was that she had fallen, hit her head, and died from her injuries. The Calloway family expressed grief. The community expressed condolences. And the matter was, for the time being, closed. What happened after Gloria Freeman's death is one of the most calculated and cold-blooded elements of this entire case. Alex Calloway approached her two adult sons, James and Marcus Freeman, and told them that he was going to help them. He recommended that they file a wrongful death claim against his homeowner's insurance, essentially a claim against himself, and that he would personally make sure the insurance company paid out what they were owed. He told them he was going to take care of the boys. The Freeman sons trusted him. They had grown up knowing the Calloway name. They believed that Alex Calloway was doing what he said he was doing, advocating for their family in the grief of their loss. He was not. The insurance claim was filed, negotiated, and ultimately resulted in a settlement of approximately $4.5 million. Not 1 cent of that money ever reached the Freeman family. Alex Calloway took it all. He took the settlement money that was supposed to go to the sons of the woman who had helped raise his children, the woman his own sons had loved, and he put it into his own pocket. James and Marcus Freeman waited for the money they had been promised. They asked questions. They were told to be patient. The years passed. They never received anything. And the woman who had given 20 years of her life to the Calloway family was represented in death by nothing more than a headstone and a betrayal. There is one more person whose story you need to understand before we get to the night of June 7th, 2021. Her name was Mallory Bennett. She was 19 years old. On February 24th, 2019, she was one of 6 young people aboard a boat owned by the Calloway family, being driven by Tyler Calloway. Tyler was 19 at the time, and he had been drinking heavily. The boat was traveling in the early hours of the morning near a bridge in Beaufort County when it struck a piling and ran aground. Mallory Bennett was thrown from the boat. She drowned. Her blood alcohol content at the time was not the issue. Tyler's was. Medical staff who treated Tyler after the accident reported that he was clearly intoxicated, slurring his speech, unsteady on his feet, with a blood alcohol content of nearly twice the legal limit for an adult. He was later charged with 3 felony counts related to the crash. And because Tyler Calloway was a Calloway, and because the Calloway name still meant something in that county, the case moved slowly. Very slowly. So slowly that by the time the wheels of justice had begun to turn for real, Tyler Calloway was dead. The Mallory Bennett wrongful death lawsuit filed by her family was significant for a reason that nobody fully understood at the time it was filed. Pursuing that lawsuit required the attorneys on the other side to subpoena financial records from the Calloway law firm. And those records, those documents that attorneys were entitled to access in the course of civil litigation, were the thread that, when pulled, began to unravel everything. The Bennett lawsuit was, in a very real sense, the beginning of the end of Alexander Calloway's ability to keep his financial crimes hidden. And he knew it. To understand the night of June 7th, 2021, you have to understand the specific pressure that Alexander Calloway was under in the weeks and months leading up to it. The pressure was not new. He had been stealing from clients for 20 years and living with the anxiety of concealment for 20 years, but it had reached a different level. A qualitatively different level. The Bennett lawsuit discovery process had attorneys examining the firm's financial records. On the very day that Carol and Tyler Calloway were murdered, June 7th, 2021, the chief financial officer of the Calloway law firm, a woman named Denise Langford, confronted Alex about missing money totaling more than $2 million. She had noticed that company checks written to certain clients were being deposited into personal accounts that Alex controlled. She asked him directly about it. He gave her an explanation. She was not satisfied with the explanation. And that afternoon, with the firm's CFO looking at him across a conference table with questions he could not answer, Alexander Calloway left the office and drove to his family's estate at Moselle. What happened at that estate in the hours that followed is the subject of the most contested legal proceedings in the state's recent history. What is not contested, what Alex Calloway himself eventually admitted, is that he lied to investigators about where he was immediately before the murders were discovered. He told law enforcement on the night of June 7th that he had spent the evening visiting his elderly mother, that he had returned home and found the bodies of his wife and son near the dog kennels, and that he had immediately called 911. What investigators would later establish is that a Snapchat video taken by Tyler Calloway showed Alex at the dog kennel with his wife and son approximately 20 minutes before the 911 call was placed. Alex was in the video, moving around the kennel area. When confronted with this evidence during his trial, Alex admitted that he had lied about his alibi. He said he had been at the kennels. He said he had lied because he was scared and because he knew how it would look. What he has maintained from the beginning, is that he did not shoot his wife and his son. He found them already dead. He panicked. He lied. And then he made the 911 call. Carol Calloway had been shot 5 times with a rifle. Tyler Calloway had been shot twice with a shotgun. 2 different weapons, both fired at close range. Neither weapon was ever recovered. There were no eyewitnesses. The forensic evidence at the scene was extensive but circumstantial in terms of directly placing a specific individual as the shooter. Law enforcement agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, worked the case for more than a year before an arrest was made. In the 13 months between the murders and the arrest, the investigation proceeded while the rest of Alexander Calloway's life came apart at an astonishing speed. 3 months after the murders, on September 4th, 2021, Alex Calloway was allegedly shot while changing a tire on a rural road in Hampton County. He was struck by a bullet that grazed his head. He survived. He told investigators it was a random roadside shooting. It was not. What emerged over the following weeks was that Alexander Calloway had arranged, in what has to be one of the most spectacularly desperate and self-defeating plans in the history of desperate plans, to have someone shoot him in the head so that he could collect a $10 million life insurance policy, with the payout going to his surviving son Buster. He wanted the money to go to his son. He wanted his son to be financially protected from the consequences of what his father had done. And he wanted the sympathy of a grieving family that had already lost 2 members to now appear to have lost 3. His fixer, the man he hired to pull the trigger, did not aim quite right, or perhaps aimed exactly right from his own perspective by ensuring he did not actually kill his employer. Either way, Alex Calloway survived with a grazed wound and was taken to the hospital. Within days, investigators understood what had actually happened. On September 16, 2021, Alexander Calloway was arrested for insurance fraud and conspiracy related to the staged shooting. He was taken into custody in Orlando, Florida, where he had traveled for opioid addiction treatment. And then, 1 month later, he was arrested again, this time for stealing the settlement money that had been meant for the Freeman family after Gloria's death. The charges mounted. 80 state indictments eventually, 22 federal charges to which he would later plead guilty. Fraud, forgery, money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy. The full accounting of what Alexander Calloway had done over the course of his legal career was staggering in its scope. Investigators determined that he had stolen approximately $8.5 million from clients and the firm at the state level, and pleaded guilty to federal charges covering an additional amount that brought the total to nearly $12 million overall. $12 million, taken from people who had trusted him. People who had come to the Calloway firm with their injuries and their losses and their grief, believing that the name on the door meant something good. And the whole time, through the arrests, through the mounting charges, through the addiction treatment and the insurance fraud proceedings, Alexander Calloway maintained that he had nothing to do with the deaths of his wife and son, that he had found them, that he had called 911, that whoever had killed Carol and Tyler Calloway was still out there. It was a position he would maintain for more than a year and a half, right up until a jury in Walterboro, South Carolina, decided they did not believe him. The trial of Alexander Calloway for the double murder of his wife Carol and his son Tyler began in January of 2023 and lasted 6 weeks. It was one of the most watched criminal trials in South Carolina's history. The courtroom in Walterboro was full every day. Journalists from across the country were present. The proceedings were covered by every major news network, and the public attention was understandable, because the trial was not simply a murder trial. It was the complete excavation of an American dynasty, the systematic exposure of everything that had been hidden behind the Calloway name for decades. Every day of testimony brought new details, new revelations, new moments that caused the gallery to murmur and the jury to sit very still. The prosecution's theory of the case was precise and devastating in its simplicity. Alexander Calloway had murdered his wife and son on the evening of June 7, 2021, because he had reached a point of financial crisis that he could no longer manage. The CFO of his firm had confronted him that afternoon about missing money. The Bennett lawsuit discovery process was getting closer to the full picture of his thefts. The walls were closing in from multiple directions simultaneously. And in the specific psychology of a man who had spent 2 decades believing that his name and his power could solve any problem, Alex Calloway made a calculation. He killed the 2 family members who would be most likely to be devastated and outraged by the exposure of his crimes. His wife, who by all accounts had no knowledge of the financial fraud, and his son Tyler, who was already facing his own legal troubles from the Bennett boat accident and whose case was scheduled to go to trial imminently. He killed them, the prosecution argued, because he believed that the sympathy generated by their deaths would give him cover. That grieving father would replace disgraced attorney in the public narrative. That the investigation into his finances would slow while people focused on the tragedy of his family. He was, in the prosecution's framing, wrong about everything except the plan itself, which appears to have gone exactly as he intended in the immediate aftermath. The investigation into his financial crimes was briefly overshadowed by the tragedy. People did focus on the family's grief. And Alexander Calloway, who had been crying for his wife and son since June 7th, became, in the short term, the grieving patriarch rather than the suspected killer. The evidence the prosecution brought to bear was largely circumstantial, but collectively overwhelming. There was the Snapchat video, discovered on Tyler's phone, showing Alex at the kennels with Carol and Tyler approximately 20 minutes before the 911 call. Alex had lied about this. He admitted he had lied. His explanation for the lie, that he was scared, that he knew how it would look, was precisely the explanation that the prosecution wanted the jury to hear, because it was an admission of consciousness of guilt without being a confession. The prosecution also presented extensive evidence of the financial crimes not as a standalone matter, but as motive, the gathering storm of exposure that Alex Calloway had been desperately trying to hold back. Denise Langford, the firm's CFO, testified about the confrontation on the afternoon of the murders. Former colleagues testified about irregularities they had noticed in the firm's accounts. The man who had agreed to shoot Alex in the staged suicide scheme testified about what Alex had told him about his reasons for wanting to die. And audio forensic experts testified that they could determine from the sound profiles of the gunshots recovered from Tyler's Snapchat video what specific weapons had been used, and that those weapons were consistent with weapons belonging to the Calloway family that had subsequently gone missing. The defense presented what they had. They challenged the audio analysis as unreliable science. They argued that the financial evidence, while damning on its own terms, did not prove that Alex had committed murder. They pointed to the absence of a murder weapon, the absence of a direct eyewitness, the absence of gunshot residue evidence, and the absence of any confession. They argued that there were other people who might have wanted Tyler dead, people connected to the Bennett accident and its aftermath. They presented Alex Calloway himself as a witness. He took the stand and admitted to the lies, admitted to the opioid addiction, admitted to the financial crimes. He admitted to almost everything. What he denied, sitting in that witness box in a Walterboro courtroom with the eyes of the nation on him, was that he had killed his wife and son. He said he loved them. He said he would never have hurt them. He said the truth would eventually vindicate him. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours. 3 hours for a 6-week trial. 3 hours to decide the fate of a man who had spent decades as the most powerful legal figure in his community. They returned a verdict of guilty on both counts of murder, guilty on both counts of using a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Judge Harrison Newman, who had presided over the trial with measured authority, sentenced Alexander Calloway to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And from the bench, before imposing the sentence, Newman delivered a statement that went beyond the formal language of judicial proceedings. He said that the case was particularly troubling because Calloway had practiced law before him. He said it was especially heartbreaking to watch a man go from being a grieving father in the media to being the person indicted and convicted of killing the family he was grieving. And he told Calloway that appeals were absolutely expected. He knew it. Calloway's team knew it. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. The question was never whether there would be an appeal. The question was whether an appeal would succeed. While Alexander Calloway's legal team prepared their appeal in the murder case, investigators and prosecutors continued to work through the extraordinary breadth of his financial crimes. And in the process of working through those crimes, several other stories came to light that deserve their own careful attention. Because the murder of Carol and Tyler Calloway was not the only death in this case that raised questions. It was simply the most dramatic one. Gloria Freeman's death had never fully gone away as a point of concern for investigators. The circumstances of her fatal fall at the Calloway estate in 2018 had seemed straightforward at the time. An unfortunate domestic accident. A woman who had worked in the house for 20 years losing her footing on the stairs and sustaining a fatal head injury. But as the full picture of Alexander Calloway's financial crimes came into view, and as investigators began to understand the specific timeline of his thefts and the escalating pressure he had been under in the years before the murders, questions about Gloria's death resurfaced with new urgency. She had worked in that house for 2 decades. She had been present for the private life of a family that was concealing an enormous amount. Investigators reopened a formal inquiry into her death. Her body was exhumed for additional forensic examination. The results of that examination did not produce a charge. But the fact that it happened, the fact that investigators felt the circumstances of Gloria Freeman's death warranted a second look in the context of everything else they now knew about Alexander Calloway, says something. It says that once you fully understood what kind of man Alex Calloway was, and what he was capable of, and what he was trying to protect, the story of a housekeeper falling down the stairs at his home stopped feeling like a settled matter. There was also the matter of Stephen Morris, a 19-year-old young man who was found dead on a rural road in Hampton County in the summer of 2015, approximately 10 miles from the Calloway estate. His death had been ruled an accident at the time, attributed to a hit-and-run driver who was never identified. But Morris had connections, social connections, connections through mutual friends, to the Calloway family, and specifically to the circle of young people around Buster Calloway. Investigators announced in the course of the broader Calloway inquiry that they were looking again at Morris's death. His body was also exhumed for further examination. Again, no charges resulted. But again, the pattern is what matters. In the shadow of Alexander Calloway, young people died in circumstances that were ruled accidents, quickly closed, and then reopened years later when the full character of the man at the center of the story became visible. And then there is the matter of the opioid addiction itself. Not as a mitigating factor, which is how it was occasionally framed in the sympathy-seeking moments of the defense narrative, but as an explanatory framework for how the fraud was able to continue for so long. Because 20 years is a very long time. And $8.5 million is an enormous amount of money to steal without getting caught. How does that happen inside a law firm? How does a man steal from his clients year after year, case after case, settlement after settlement, and maintain the trust and the respect and the professional standing that Alexander Calloway maintained for 2 decades? The answer is partly structural. Law firm oversight is imperfect, and a trusted senior partner with a family name behind him receives less scrutiny than a junior associate. But it is also cultural. The culture of Calloway country was one in which the Calloway family was not scrutinized the way everyone else was scrutinized. Their word was taken. Their explanations were accepted. Their name was trusted. And that cultural deference, that multi-generational habit of giving the Calloways the benefit of every doubt, functioned as the most effective shield any fraudster could ask for. Alexander Calloway did not steal $12 million despite his family's reputation. He stole it because of it. The financial reckoning that followed the murder conviction was extensive. Alex Calloway pleaded guilty to 22 federal charges in September of 2023, admitting to conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison in April of 2024. In the parallel state financial crimes case, he was sentenced to 27 years after pleading guilty to a portion of the state charges. He was already serving 2 life sentences for the murders at the time of these additional sentences. The cumulative effect was that Alexander Calloway, regardless of what happened to his murder convictions, was never going to be a free man. The financial crimes alone guaranteed that. But then came May of 2026, and everything changed again. The South Carolina Supreme Court's decision to overturn Alexander Calloway's murder convictions was handed down on May 13, 2026. It was based not on any new evidence of his innocence, not on a finding that the forensic analysis had been flawed, not on a determination that the prosecution had committed misconduct. It was based on something that, when you first hear it, sounds almost too extraordinary to believe. The conviction was overturned because of a court clerk, a woman named Sandra Beckett, who had served as the county clerk in Walterboro during the trial, had apparently developed an extraordinary level of personal investment in the outcome of the proceedings. She told a colleague, in conversations that were later recounted under oath, that she wanted to write a book about the Calloway trial to help pay for a lake house she wanted to buy. She also allegedly made statements indicating that she believed Calloway was guilty and that a guilty verdict would be better for her book. She pleaded guilty to charges including perjury, obstruction of justice, and misconduct in December of 2025. She received 3 years of probation. Calloway's attorneys had argued, through the appeal process, that Beckett's conduct had violated their client's right to a fair trial and an impartial jury. The state had argued that her conduct, while improper, had not demonstrably affected the jury's deliberations and did not rise to the level of prejudice that would require a new trial. The Supreme Court disagreed. In a 27-page opinion, the court wrote that prejudice was presumed from Beckett's conduct and that the state had failed to overcome that presumption. The court acknowledged explicitly that the eyes of the nation had been on the Calloway trial, and it ordered a new trial. Alexander Calloway remained in prison. He was not released. The murder convictions had been overturned, but the federal and state financial crime sentences remained in effect and would keep him incarcerated regardless of what happened to the murder case. He was not going home. He was going to a new courtroom. The state attorney general announced that the state intended to retry the case. And the family of Carol Calloway, and the family of Tyler Calloway, and the family of Mallory Bennett, and the family of Gloria Freeman were left to contemplate what it meant that the process of justice for the people they had lost was starting over. The reaction from those families was exactly what you would expect from people who had already been through 4 years of extraordinary pain and institutional process. Disbelief, exhaustion, grief that had been forced to take a form. The form of legal proceedings, of testimony, of public scrutiny, that grief was never designed to take, and that now had to be sustained even longer. Mallory Bennett's family had been through the civil lawsuit, the criminal proceedings against Tyler's death, and the full unfolding of the Calloway family scandal. They had been through more than any family should be asked to endure. The Freeman family, James and Marcus Freeman, the sons of Gloria, had watched as their mother's death became a footnote in a story about financial fraud, and as the money that was supposed to be theirs and never was became one item in an accounting of $12 million stolen from many people across many years. They were not nothing in this story. They were central to it. But the legal process had a way of making everyone peripheral except the man at the center of it. The question of what happens next is genuinely open. A new trial requires new jury selection, new presentation of evidence, new testimony from witnesses, some of whom have now had years to reflect on what they said and how they said it. The prosecution will argue the same theory: financial motive, the Snapchat video, the lie about the alibi, the staged suicide attempt, the overall portrait of a man who believed he could make problems disappear. The defense will argue that the original trial was tainted and that a fair review of the evidence does not support a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Somewhere in South Carolina, a new jury will eventually be seated, and the process will begin again. What does not begin again is the life of Carol Calloway, or the life of Tyler Calloway, or the life of Mallory Bennett, or the 20 years of service that Gloria Freeman gave to a family that did not protect her when it mattered. Those lives are finished. The consequences for the people who lost those lives continue, with no end in sight, through a legal system that is doing what legal systems do: processing, appealing, retrying, overturning, beginning again. Whether that process is justice depends entirely on your definition of the word. And your definition of the word, I suspect, depends significantly on which side of that process you are standing on. There is something about the Calloway case that goes beyond the specific facts of the crimes and speaks to something structural about the way power operates in small communities across America. Not just the American South. Not just rural counties with dynasties built over 3 generations. Everywhere. The story of a family so woven into the institutions of its community that it stops being accountable to those institutions in the normal way is not a regional story. It is an American story. It is the story of what happens when a name becomes a shield and a history becomes a license and a community's deference becomes a mechanism of concealment. Alexander Calloway did not invent the conditions that allowed him to steal for 20 years. He exploited conditions that already existed. The deference was already there. The benefit of the doubt was already there. The habit of not looking too closely at what the Calloway family was doing was already there. He simply understood it better than anyone and used it more deliberately than anyone would have thought possible. The people who paid the price for that deference were not the powerful. They were never the powerful. They were Gloria Freeman, who worked in that house for 20 years and whose death generated a coroner's report that was never filed and an insurance settlement that was stolen. They were the families of Alex's clients, accident victims, people dealing with wrongful death claims, people at the worst moments of their lives who put their trust in a man whose name told them that trust was warranted. They were Mallory Bennett, 19 years old, thrown from a boat in the early hours of the morning. They were James and Marcus Freeman, waiting for years for money that their mother died believing they would receive. The powerful man at the center of the story suffered consequences eventually. Enormous consequences, consequences that will define the rest of his life. But the suffering was not equally distributed. It never is. Carol Calloway deserves to be remembered as a person, not just as a victim. She was 52 years old. She had spent her adult life embedded in the charitable and civic life of her community. She had raised 2 sons. She had built a social world for herself that was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, genuinely warm and genuinely hers. She did not know, by the best available evidence, that her husband was stealing from his clients. She did not know about the fraud. She trusted him. And I want to ask you something before we finish. Something I genuinely do not have a clean answer to. We talk about justice in these cases as if it is a destination, as if the verdict is where justice lives, as if the sentence is when it arrives. But the overturning of Alexander Calloway's murder convictions in 2026 demonstrates something that anyone who has paid close attention to this case already knew. Justice is not a destination. It is a process, and processes can be interrupted, delayed, challenged, overturned, and restarted. They can be compromised by a court clerk who wanted to write a book. They can be extended indefinitely by appeal after appeal after appeal. They can leave families who have already endured the unendurable in a state of suspended grief for years beyond what anyone should have to sustain. Is that justice? Is the system that produced the original conviction, then allowed it to be overturned on the basis of a clerk's book ambitions, then scheduled a new trial? Is that system serving the people it is supposed to serve? Or is it serving itself? Do you believe Alexander Calloway killed his wife and son? Do you think the overturned conviction represents the system working as it should, protecting the rights of the accused regardless of the weight of public opinion? Or do you think it represents the system failing the victims' families in a way that is both legal and devastating? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and on a case like this I genuinely want to hear what you think. Because the Calloway case is not finished. The new trial has not happened yet. The story does not have an ending. And the best any of us can do in the meantime is stay informed, ask the hard questions, and refuse to let the complexity of the process make us forget the simplicity of what was lost. Carol Calloway, Tyler Calloway, Mallory Bennett, Gloria Freeman. Those are the names that matter most in this story, not the name on the courthouse door. If this story has gotten under your skin the way it has gotten under mine, if you're going to be thinking about the Calloway family for the next several days, subscribe to MINDLORE'S Studio right now and hit the bell so you do not miss our next Buried Truth documentary. Because next week we are going deeper into a case that begins with a Hong Kong model, a luxury apartment registered in the wrong name, and a family that decided she was worth more to them dead than alive. It is one of the most shocking international true crime cases of the decade, and it is coming to this channel next week. Subscribe. Share this video if it moved you. And remember, the truth does not always arrive on schedule. But when it arrives, it tends to arrive completely.